I'm Kathy Riley, and I'm the lower school counselor here at Grayland Country Day. And we really appreciate everyone coming to attend this event today. We have a group of ACIS counselors, and ACIS is the Association of Colorado Independent Schools. And so the counselors get together every month or every 2 months. And last year we decided that we would try to do a speaking series that we've decided to call the Circle of Influence. And so our plan is to do 1 or 2 talks a year where we pull together the counselors at different schools and present on a topic that we think is relevant. So today we've got wonderful people here to share their knowledge about self-regulation and how to help your children manage their frustrations. So we have Laura Hoffman, who is affiliated with Montessori School of Denver. Daniel Kettleman, who is at Evergreen Country Day School, and Kelly McAdams, who is at Fountain Valley School, which is down in the Springs. So we thank her for driving up and attending. Anything else, Craig, that you think we should add?
We have our topic for this winter. So Dr. Edelman, who's presenting today, was presenting for the Independent School Heads and Trustees meeting in Vail this past weekend. And I had the joy of sitting in on his, on character education, social and emotional development. And it was a hit. Parents just loved it. So we thought next time we'll do what all the schools, various schools are doing for social and emotional growth and character education. So we'll do sort of a montage of what the various schools are presenting and doing and things that are good for our kids in that regard. And they need the research clearly shows kids who have character education do that. So that's our next topic, and that will be sometime this winter.
Great. Well, again, thanks so much for coming. And I'll let them take it.
Can you guys hear okay? Yeah. What? Yeah, so what our plan is that each of us are going to talk on some various topics to do with helping your children manage their emotions. And then we would like to ideally do our talking first and save questions for the end. And we're ideally, hopefully, going to have about half an hour for questions and discussion at the end. So if we could hold questions till then, try to remember what you want to ask, maybe make a note if you have something to write on, and save those questions for the end.
Mic's on?
Well, if I stand that close to it.
Get it close.
Yeah, I need to be closer. Okay, let's see. What?
Can you slide it, Laura? Will it slide across the table, or is it?
I just don't know.
There.
All right. So I'm Laura Hoffman, and I consult at the Montessori School of Denver, and I'm also in private practice in Denver. And what I'd like to start with is just an introduction to the idea of helping our children deal with life's frustrations. That's how we build this talk, was helping children deal with life's frustrations. However, I feel really strongly that in order to help our children deal with frustration, we really need to teach them about how to deal with emotions in general. It's not just about frustrations and anger and those types of feelings, but any feeling that they might have. Certainly the ones that we would deem the more negative feelings are the ones that are harder for us to deal with as parents and for us to deal with when we're experiencing those feelings themselves, or when our children are experiencing those feelings. Those are the toughest ones, right? Anger, frustration, sadness, embarrassment. Those types of feelings are the toughest ones to deal with. So whether we call it, I have a kind of list of terms that we might refer to in thinking about handling feelings. One is stress management, another anger management, frustration tolerance, emotional regulation, self-regulation, and emotional intelligence. Those were the terms that kind of jumped out at me when I thought about what do we want to think about, what should we be thinking about when we're helping our kids, or thinking about helping our kids deal with life's frustrations. So I have this note, helping children handle frustration means teaching them how to handle their emotions in general. I'm going to choose a few of these to talk about in a little bit more detail. One is the idea of emotional intelligence. And I found a few definitions that I liked. One is the ability to identify and understand emotions within oneself and others. Just the ability to identify and understand emotions. Another is the ability to, another aspect of emotional intelligence is the ability to relate well to people. Because if we understand our feelings well, we tend to be able to relate better to people, because relationships tend to be inherently emotional. They're charged. They have sadness, happiness, embarrassment, different things that happen when we engage with other people are very emotional, tend to be very emotional. And so children and adults who get emotions and how to handle and process and understand emotions tend to relate a little better to others. The ability to successfully adapt to, cope with, and deal with environmental demands. When we look at the literature about what makes us intelligent, there's, I'm not going to go through all of this by any means, but I want you to just, there's, historically, first we talked about, what makes a person intelligent is how smart they are, how able they are to manage logical tasks, how able they are to think things through. But over time, there's been more and more of an emphasis around that we're more successful when we can also understand emotions. And so kind of one of the things I would ask you is, how did you come to understand emotions? How did you come to be able to process emotions for yourself as an adult, right? Did somebody teach you along the way? Was it explicitly stated? Did your parents teach you what sadness was, what happiness is, how to manage emotions, how to deal with frustrations? Was that something that was explicitly taught? Probably not. Maybe in some families it was more emphasized than others, but in many it wasn't emphasized at all. It's just something we sort of pick up along the way, right? And I would argue that for some children, it's much harder for them, for whatever reason, and we can go into debating and discussing why it might be more difficult for some children than others to handle their emotions, to manage their feelings, to handle life's frustrations. But for some children, it is more difficult, and they just don't get it in the same way. Like you might have two children. I have two children. One of them can handle their emotions far better than the other, even though I've exposed them to very similar things. And so we can argue, is it temperament? Is it the way they've been, is it parenting? Can we parented them a little bit differently? Is it their temperament? Is there biology, their genetics? What is it about my two children, let's say, that makes one of them more capable of handling emotions than the other one? I don't know exactly, but that's the way it is. And just like if you have two children and you have one who's struggling in reading, you would get help for that child in reading. Absolutely, if they were really struggling, teacher mentioned that they were struggling in reading, you would get them help in reading. You would figure it out. You would talk to the teacher. You would give them extra help and assistance at home. You might hire a tutor. You might go to one of those centers that helps children with learning disabilities or learning issues. You would do something about it. So my argument, and one of the biggest pieces I'd like to leave you with today, is we need to help our kids when they're struggling with emotions too. We need to teach them, we need to sort of tutor them around learning how to handle their emotions better if you have a child who's struggling with emotions. So how do you do that, right? And we'll be talking about some different ideas. So I want to go into the concept of emotional regulation. And so emotional regulation is the ability to exert some control over aspects of emotions. So feelings, thoughts, physical responses, physiological responses. What does that mean when we have feelings? We sometimes have physiological responses, right? Our knees tremble, we shake, we're nervous. Our kids lose their appetite sometimes when they're revved up about something. Behavioral aspects of our functioning is another piece of emotional regulation, because then what do we do with it? How do we feel about it? What do we think about it? How does our body respond to it? And then what do we do? So these are all aspects of emotional regulation. And so what is then emotional dysregulation? What's going on when a child or an adult is emotionally dysregulated? So I have some points here. When feelings become disorganized or out of control, when a child cannot shift how they're feeling, when a parent cannot help the child shift in whatever it is that they're feeling or how they're responding. And then I would know, like, it might look like a temper tantrum or intense upset, but it doesn't always look like that. Some kids are quieter in their dysregulation. You can tell that something's off and something's not right, it's not, that one's child is feeling off in some way, but maybe they're not having a temper tantrum, but you still know that something's not quite right in your child in the way that they're reacting or responding to a situation. So I'm going to just move right into what I believe can help children manage feelings better. So one point is, and this is one of those really obvious ones that you've heard many times along the way, right? If you keep things stable, if you keep things predictable, if you keep things consistent, then our kids tend to do better and they tend to manage their emotions better. Okay, that's really easily said, right? But really hard sometimes to actually do. And so I would encourage you to think about that concept and think about ways that you could enhance the stability, the predictability, the consistency around your children. Even if you don't feel like you can have a set schedule every single day, 8 o'clock we do this, 8:15 we do this, after school we do exactly this, bedtime routines are exactly this. If that's not the way you're put together, it's going to be hard for you to do that kind of thing. But if there are ways that you can tweak things a little bit and insert a little bit more consistency, a little bit more predictability, a little bit more stability, it will help your child. And children who have trouble with emotional regulation tend to respond really well to this piece. So if it's possible to do incrementally little bits of increased consistency, that would be great. Another very important aspect is to talk about feelings. So if you have a child who struggles with emotions and with managing their emotions, instead of just assuming they get emotions on some level, you want to just make it very, very explicit. And actually label feelings, say, wow, you look really frustrated right now. You look really sad right now. You seem upset. So naming their feelings, and then another really important piece that I have a whole other slide on is labeling your own feelings for kids. So that you might say something like, I had a really stressful day at work. I think I'll take a walk, because when I take a walk, it really helps me reduce my stress. So that you name that you actually have feelings too, and then what you might do about it, or how you take care of yourself. So they see, oh, a person has feelings, and they actually take a step to do something about it, and I can too. So that modeling that can really help kids. So one piece is just talking about feelings, making them explicit, labeling them, asking them how they're feeling, discussing it, talking about it, not just assuming they get it, but really taking it to a level that makes it more explicit. Another, I have my kids are now like 8 and 10, but when my 8-year-old was a baby, we had a friend come over who was a psychologist, and he commented on our parenting of our little 3-month-old, and he said, don't forget that it's really important to teach your kids frustration tolerance. Something to that effect, which meant to me, at the time it was funny, it was cute. We were fresh out of grad school and all these concepts swirling in our minds about attaching to our kids and soothing our kids and helping our kids self-soothe themselves and teach them this and teach them that and do this. And it's like, what do you do when you have your own child and you have all this knowledge as a psychologist and you have your own kids? Like, forget it, right? It's true. That's probably okay. So, but his point really lasted with me. It stayed with me. It resonated for me. And the point is that it's really important to teach our children about patience and about frustration tolerance. It's really important not to respond to every single thing that they say that they need immediately. And it's not just about teaching independence and creating independent kids. I actually feel like we're not independent as people necessarily. We're interdependent. And so it's false to say we just need to teach our kids to get out there and be able to do everything for themselves. Yes, that's a piece of it. Independence is important, but we're really interdependent on each other, especially within the context of families. And so Nonetheless, it's important for us to not always respond to our children immediately and to let them have that feeling of, oh, something's not quite right, and I'm feeling frustrated, or things don't feel exactly okay at this moment, and I can tolerate that, and I can handle it, and I can cry for 10 seconds, or a minute, or 2 minutes, and then my parent comes. And yes, my parent is there, and my parent is consistent, and my parent loves me, but they don't have to respond to me to every single thing I need instantly. So that there's that tension and there's that moment of, oh, I can handle this. I can handle this. I'm okay. So I just found a few things that I thought were nice that I'd like to share. Parents who are effective with their children around feelings believe that their child's feelings are important, that their child's feelings are okay, even if their actions aren't. My husband's a psychologist also, and he likes to make a joke about this kind of thing, and he'll say, it's not your behavior I don't like, it's you I don't like. And the joke that he turns around, that's very silly. The point is the opposite of that. The point is, even though we make mistakes sometimes, even though we do things that we don't always like our children to do, they are inherently good and wonderful, right? Okay, experiencing negative emotions is important, and that's really, really a big piece of this, which is that we often turn away from, we don't like to experience negative emotions within ourselves, and we certainly don't like our children to have to experience negative emotions. But if you can view those interactions, those situations as an opportunity for them and for learning, it really turns it around a bit, right? In other words, negative emotions don't have to be something that we shy away from, or that we turn away from, or that we take away from our children. But we actually let them experience them, because that can help them. They're just opportunities. They're opportunities for learning, and they're important. It's so important for us to allow those feelings to just be, because then we learn how to experience them, and how to feel them, and how to move through them, and how to process them, so that sadness doesn't become a terrible thing, or anger doesn't become a terrible thing. It becomes something that we can learn from, and grow from, and move through. I think I kind of covered those. I like this one too. I found this one last night. Empathic listeners use their eyes to identify the physical evidence of their child's emotions. So the child suddenly seems a bit withdrawn, or they're not eating well, or they're more lethargic or less energetic than they typically are. You can't identify that they're sick or anything like that, but something's off kind of physically in them. Or some kids get really revved up, really kind of, I have a daughter who sometimes just gets really excited, just really animated and really excited, and really, and that's also a piece of her worry and her anxiety, and that comes out in that sort of way. Empathic listeners use their ears to hear underlying messages behind what a child is saying. So they're expressing frustration, but what is it really about? Is it upset? Is it fear? Are they hurt in some way emotionally by someone else or by you? So what's really, what are they really saying underneath it all? We use our imagination to put ourselves in our child's shoes, to understand how they're feeling, what's going on for them. One of the things that parents will say a lot is, we get so frustrated because we get frustrated because we tell our kids, please do this, like it's time to get ready for school. Let's go, come on, it's time to get ready for school, right? And they're engaged in something, they're doing something, and they're not really listening. Okay, one sec. It's like, I hear that how many times a day? I don't know how many times a day I hear, one sec, okay? But if I put myself in my child's shoes, my kids get really engaged in whatever they're doing at any given moment. So if even if it's before school and they've taken care of most of their jobs, but they still have some things to do, and then they're really engaged in, let's say, playing with Legos, or drawing, or writing, or just something, and then I'm like, come on, let's go, and I'm trying to shift their attention. I have to remember, and sometimes if I just pause and put myself in their shoes, but wait, they're totally engaged in what they're doing. So I might say, in 2 minutes, I'm going to need you to, whatever it might be. So that I give them a moment of transition, and I attend to where they are and what their needs are, not just what my needs are, which are to get everything done by an exact certain amount of time. We use our hearts to feel what our children are feeling, and then we use words to reflect back what we see, hear, imagine in a soothing, non-judgmental way, ideally. Okay, so then I talked a bit about modeling, handling our own feelings, naming the feelings that we experience, describing aloud the ways that we take care of ourselves. Like, our kids know maybe that we enjoy hiking or that we go to the gym or that we do these things, but to actually explicitly state why we do those things sometimes is really useful. It's really helpful to not just assume that they get that this is what I do to take care of myself, but to say, this is one of the things that I do to take care of myself. And when I feel stressed, I do this, and it really helps me. It settles me down inside. It calms me. It soothes me, whatever your language is that works in your family and with your kids. We can't help our children handle emotions well when we don't handle our own emotions well. So if we have trouble flaring easily with anger, or our tempers are triggered easily, certainly that is something that our children can replicate and can copy and can emulate. So it is important to check in with ourselves and see how we're doing in terms of managing our own feelings and what we're displaying in front of our children, because that does make a difference. So if that's something that you struggle with, then one piece of attention that would be really important for you to do something about is yourself and how you respond and what you're displaying in front of your kids. So I'll leave it at that for now. And one piece that I feel really passionate about is that we often as parents rush in to soothe our kids. We want to take away the pain, we want to take away the hurt. We want to fix it, really, for lack of a better term. We often do. We want to help them to feel better and help them to feel better right away. But what ends up happening is that kids then rely on us for that piece. That when they need to be soothed or when they need to settle themselves down from some emotional upset, they then look to us. And then what happens when they're not with us? What happens when they're at school? What happens when they're at a play date? What happens when they're hanging out with friends? Then they don't know exactly what to do, and we can inadvertently kind of create a stance in them of turning to others or something else for self-soothing rather than looking inside of themselves for a way to cope with life's frustrations and difficult emotions. So the way that I like to talk with parents about it, and the way I try to practice this with my own kids, is to say, well, they're clearly upset, they're reacting to something, and I say to my kids, well, I wonder what you could do about it. I wonder what would help you feel a little better about this. Like, I can see that you're really upset, and I'm really sorry that you're upset right now. But wonder what you could do to help yourself feel better. Can you think of anything? And so I kind of put it back on them to figure out some ways to manage situations themselves. And it's not a turning away. It's not I don't mean to say that you shouldn't be empathic or caring. You should be empathic and caring towards your children. It's really important. But it's also really important for them to realize that they have a lot of tools within them to manage and handle their feelings. And so if they're a child who will say, well, I don't know what to do. I have no idea. I don't know what to do. Then when they're not in the midst of upset, ideally, you can talk to them about different ways to handle and manage emotions. And teach them, and you sort of do all the different things that we're going to talk about here today. Yes, good luck, right? With 100 different ideas. But take what you like and leave the rest, And we've all put together handouts and resources, and we're offering you resources and, lots and lots of different ways of approaching this. So take what you like and leave what you don't, or what doesn't fit for you and your family. But I do encourage you to think about ways to teach your children about emotions and to help them learn ways to manage feelings. So I like to divide it into a couple different categories, and this is the very last piece of what I'm talking about, which is to teach them about shifting things inside their body, to teach them about shifting things inside their minds, and to teach them about taking some action. These are kind of some broad categories. And if they have these ideas in mind, then when you say something to them like, I wonder what you could do to settle yourself down, they might look to, like if you create a list with them. That's a fun thing to do sometimes with kids, is to have them have their own list of strategies that they can use or tools that they can use to help themselves when they're upset. And so this is just one framework for you to think about it, but there are many others, and again, I encourage you to explore and find what's right for your family. So if you're helping your child to shift things inside their body, then you're helping them to relax physically, okay? And so the ideas that I have here are around taking deep breaths. So this idea of like smell the flowers, blow out the candles. You can't really smell the scent of a rose without taking a deep breath. You can't do it without, you know, a nice deep breath. And you can't blow out birthday candles without like, it doesn't work if you don't, you know? So the idea is to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And it's a cute little concept. And so it might be something that could work for some kids. Another is progressive relaxation, kind of tightening and then relaxing different parts of the body. And another very proven way to reduce stress, to settle down emotions, is to exercise. I'll have kids who will take a ride just around a short block in the morning before school. They're nervous about a test, or they're just feeling uptight or scared about going to school, but they ride their scooters up and down the alley, or they ride the bike around the block, something like that. Do jumping jacks in your room if you can't get out, but any little bit of movement, even a short amount of movement, really helps. And then of course having your kids engaged in some kind of regular exercise tends to really help as well. Shifting things inside the mind is about teaching kids and talking to kids about replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. Teach kids the idea of positive self-talk. Wow, it really seems like you're thinking really negatively about yourself right now. It depends on the age of the kid, what you can say and how you can say it, but wow, I wonder if you could say things that are a little bit more positive about yourself, and give them the language. And I have a bunch of ideas in my handout too about how to kind of shift that language a little bit. Okay, let's see. Oh, visualizing a calming place is something that can be useful. And what I'd like to add to that, if you haven't already added this piece, is to have kids bring in every sense that they can. That's a piece that multi-sensory piece really tends to help kids. So if they're visualizing a beach, they have to think about and visualize in their minds how it sounds, the waves crashing, the birds calling out, seagulls crying out, that kind of thing. They have to remember how it smells, the salty air. They have to remember how it tastes even, if you've ever tasted a little bit of that salt water or something like that, how it feels to run your fingers through the sand. So the more senses that you bring into a visualization, the more it gets the kids out of the negative space or out of the upset space and to a more calming space. So that's a little piece I'd like to add. Distractions help. That sometimes is something that families can do, obviously, and using humor. I came across one example I like, which is something like, if you're building blocks with a kid and the blocks keep falling down, the kid's getting really frustrated, they say something, that silly old block is not cooperating with us today. You just make something funny out of it and distance it from the situation at hand and turn it into something that's a little bit more amusing if you can, and when you can use humor, that tends to shift things. And the last thing is to take an action, do something different. Change settings, move your body, do an enjoyable activity, talk to someone. We've got lots and lots of different ideas in here, but taking an action can often help settle kids down. And so if they have this kind of toolbox of strategies, or I like to say an imaginary backpack, tell your kids that they have an imaginary backpack that's with them everywhere they go. And they can pull out one idea to try, and if that one doesn't work, put it back in the backpack and take another one. But you always have that backpack with you. You always have all these ideas with you everywhere you go. And you can take one idea out, and it doesn't always work the first time. As you well know, you try to settle yourself down, you try to relax. It doesn't always work, right? And so you have to try something else. If taking a walk doesn't settle you down enough, then you go talk to your spouse about what's going on, or you talk to a friend, you call somebody. That's what we do as adults, and we need to teach our children that they can do that kind of thing as well, that they can try one idea, that one doesn't work, okay, I got another one. And so if they have this kind of storehouse or this backpack full of ideas of things to do, they'll be able to reach in anytime and think of one of those ideas to settle themselves down. And then when you see them doing it, tell them, wow, I noticed that you use some of your strategies, or I noticed that you tried to, I don't know, I noticed you did some jumping jacks. I noticed you went over and got your blanket, because I know that's really calming and soothing to you, and that's great, great idea. And really support them when you notice them or catch them taking an action to help themselves and soothe themselves. So I think I'll pause there. Yes.
Before you start, Laura mentioned handouts. I'm going to move them over here. So if you have to leave early, they'll be on these risers. And just grab a handout. We're also videotaping today. Hopefully, with technology, we'll be able to get it on YouTube, and then we'll send an electronic alert to all the schools about how to link to the site. But I'm not promising anything. Like normally, my son does it for me, but he's off to college. I really don't know what to do.
Let me try this. And you all just tell me if it's not loud enough. That was awesome. That was great. I'm jealous. I'm not sure I can capture as much as Laura did. And I'm gonna present a very specific set of techniques that come from a specific source. We're each going to be presenting examples. Mine is a way of thinking about, a way of approaching emotion regulation, or helping your child calm down, or helping your child deal with frustrations. And it's got 4 or 5 steps to it. You're not going to go home and be able to do all 5 right away, I don't think. If you are, wow. Call me and tell me how you did that. But even if you just do step 1 today or tomorrow, my guess is that you would see a small difference. And sometimes seeing a small difference makes a huge difference, doesn't it? Just knowing that you can do something different and get out of a pattern. This approach is just like, it's very consistent with what Laura talked about and with what Kelly's going to talk about, and you can integrate each of these approaches, as you'll see. Mine comes from 2 guys named Ross Green and Stuart Avalon. They wrote this book, The Explosive Child, and a couple of other books. We've written a book that's useful for regulating emotions in school settings, but this one's for parents, and I found it helpful as a parent and as a psychologist. There's also a website. You'll get my handout. It has all this stuff on it. So some of the basic premises behind this approach. First of all, prevention is key. It's similar to what Laura was saying about predictability and consistency. And I was just thinking, first of all, I'll make a couple of comments. Do we all feel sorry for Laura and her husband's kids, 2 psychologists, 2 childs, same in my family. And so as we tell these stories, you've got to feel sorry for our children. But I know you guys are
People say that they're either totally well-adjusted or totally.
Yes. I can tell stories from my days at Colorado Academy with parents who both were mental health professionals. It's a hit or miss proposition. But my 4-year-old, this morning our power was out, and I had to leave much earlier than usual to go to a school meeting. And I came back after the school meeting to get ready to come here, and I'm a little bit nervous about coming to do this. And I have to get my 4-year-old to take her to preschool, and she was screaming the entire time, "I want mommy! I want mommy!" And she's, this is one of those phases where I am nothing to her. And it didn't stop. It was fairly unusual for her, but it didn't stop, so it was just a perfect setup for coming in today. And, I had to use all my best skills. She didn't feel better. No, she didn't. I'm serious, and it's very much what Laura's saying. I couldn't make the pain go away, and this is relevant to what I'm going to talk about too. Part of the reason she was so stressed is because I'm in a rush. That's not her fault. That's not her problem, and I have to own that. I just said to her several times, "I know you miss mommy. You love mommy." I said, "You don't love me right now." I know. I have to get to this meeting. It's like the early morning thing. This is about me. And I had to say that to her. She just kept crying. Maybe a little lower decibel. She got to school, etc. She was still crying when I left. But I do know, I have confidence. I know she's going to be fine. You can't always feel that way, but this was one where I did know she was going to be fine. So I'll check my phone to see if they're calling me. Okay, so the basic premises behind this approach. One is prevention. And it really relates to the second premise. The idea that certain kids, there are kids who have more difficulty regulating their emotions than other kids. And for all kids, but especially some more than others, once they reach a certain threshold, it is nearly impossible to do anything about it. These guys wrote this book. If you read the first couple chapters, they'll be talking about kids with this disorder and that disorder. They're talking about very extremely difficult children. And most of our kids are not quite in that territory, but some of ours might be. But even if our kids are not in that territory, we all probably know that experience of once the kid crosses a certain threshold, you're trying to use logic or reason with them, you're trying to teach them something, you don't have a chance. So prevention is huge, both thinking about their energy level, their hunger level, and then planning for situations like mornings. Like last night I should have, sat down with my daughter and said, this is what it's going to be like tomorrow. Let's think about how we're going to deal with this. That kind of thing. We're going to the grocery store. You do know, you can identify many, if not most of the situations that trigger your kids into some of these episodes. Homework stress, food stress, social stress, things like that. And so planning, especially when they're calm and they're relaxed, planning ahead is a key part of this approach. Power struggles just kill us all. They make us totally ineffective. Our kids dig in deeper. They want to fight us more because they're trying to develop a sense of power for themselves as well. And if we go in like gangbusters, we strip them of that power, and then we don't have anybody to work with, and they don't have anybody to work with, and they just want to fight us. Raise your hand if you've read this book. Anybody read this book? 3, 4, 5 of you. So you know about baskets A, B, and C. Baskets A, B, and C, the different kind of situations we deal with as parents. And basket A is when the situation is so urgent, so unsafe, that we do have to exert as much power as we can. Ross Greene and Stuart Avalon they start out by saying only 1% of situations fall into basket A. They now say that none do. Okay? But I'm of the belief that there's at least 1% running across a crowded street, that kind of thing, is that where there's no thinking, there's no discussion, there's no negotiation. We stop them. And there are a few other situations like that, but really not many. They say it's pretty much all basket B. I'll go back to basket B in a minute. Basket C is when you let the child take total control. And you can think of a lot of examples like this when they have free play time and they can choose what they want to do. You can actually think of a lot of different kinds of situations that can be basket B. But the kinds that those aren't the ones that lead to emotion dysregulation typically. The ones that lead to emotion dysregulation are tensions and stresses and having to work, the interdependence that Laura was talking about. We get angriest and most upset when we're involved in a struggle with another person. So basket B are situations that are negotiable. We're not teaching, this approach is not teaching our children to become little lawyers. That's a miss. I'm giving you this in 20, 25 minutes. You're not going to get the full deal today. But I do want to say it's not so that they can out-negotiate us. It's so that we can share. This approach is called the collaborative problem-solving approach. It's so we can put our heads together and share this. We are interdependent. And if it's all me telling you what to do, just like Laura said beautifully, you're not going to grow up. You're not going to know what to do when I'm not around. And you're not going to feel good about yourself either. So this approach is about putting our heads together and thinking together about what's possible. So, obviously, this approach requires working with the child before they hit vapor lock. Vapor lock, I'm not a car person, but I guess it's when, anyone explain when air pressure gets stuck into something or another, and then that's when you press on the gas and nothing's happening and all that stuff. How well explained was that? Ross Green explains it much better. But that's when they get stuck and there's no movement in either direction and nothing can happen. So this approach is best on anticipating a challenge, anticipating a frustration. If you can't, obviously you can't anticipate everything, but you can start it as soon as you see them show initial signs of distress. You can also use this approach later, after an explosion, when everybody's calmer, everybody's happier, to debrief and plan for the next time when this is going to be possible. This is the basic steps. I'm going to go through each in a little more detail, just so you see the steps. De-escalation, empathy, 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 empathy. You won't hear that enough from any of us. Framing the dilemma, inviting problem solving, and if you absolutely must, generate ideas. And now I'll take you through what I mean by each of those steps. And by the way, this is a bit of my slant on the collaborative problem solving approach. It's a little bit different than book, for better or for worse. Step one, de-escalation. This is a classic. I'm not saying no yet. You can even cut out the word yet. I'm not saying no. Now, if you go home and do that today and do nothing, just stop there. You will see something a little bit different. Because I know I'm the same, when our kids are upset, when they're fighting us, we just want to dive in and start telling them what to do and telling them how things will be better. I'm not saying no yet. Let me think about it. Step number two, and although this in some ways may be the simplest, I think it's really the hardest. Empathy, putting ourselves in the child's shoes. We all expect a lot of our kids, especially those of us with kids in independent schools. A lot, we're all achievement oriented, all those kinds of things. But our kids are living in a different reality than us. And they're not, we often all expect them to be little adults, and they're not even close to that. And half the time, we're not even great adults. So we shouldn't be expecting perfection from them either. So this step is really something like I can imagine, I can see, I realize, and I just wrote down some examples. And I hope you'll be thinking of examples, and maybe when we do question and answer, we can practice some different examples. This homework is really unpleasant. So when we get into an argument with our kid, we say to them, but you're home, but it's not that hard, and you usually like it, and and you got to do your homework if you want to get good grades. That's all logic. That when the kid is starting to get frustrated, that does very little. All it does is keep us in a power struggle with them, and it misses the point. They're not enjoying themselves. Most of us. Some kids like homework, but that's pretty rare. I was trying to think of it as I thought of examples, the kid just wants something right now. That ice cream looks so good right now. That's empathy instead of, eat ice cream before dinner, all that stuff. If you do that first, you're just going to be in a fight. Math has been really challenging lately. It's been hard to figure out how to deal with those kids lately. They've been really annoying. They've been picking on you. They've been insulting you. That feels really bad. I was thinking about kids who fight about food, how uncomfortable it is for you to eat that food. That food doesn't feel good in your mouth. I'm serious. There's, parents even fights with their kids about certain food. That food doesn't taste good to you. How annoying your brother has been lately. How hard it is to go back and forth between mom and dad's house. How uncomfortable that is, how nervous that makes you, how nervous you get when you have to give a presentation. I thought of that last night as I was putting together this presentation. How it doesn't make sense to you to make your bed. How many of you get in this fight with your boys especially? You gotta make your bed, what your room to be need. This is, don't you want to get into a clean bed? No! They don't care if they're getting a clean bed. That makes no difference to them whatsoever. So if you're trying to argue with them why they need to have a clean bed, you're gone. You're lost. You don't need to argue with them about that. Appreciate it doesn't mean squat to them to have a clean bed. How badly you wanted to win that game. I was thinking of another time when I could not help regulate my child's emotions. And I'm looking at Wendy because our kids are on sports teams together, and my son struck out to end the game. And he was distraught for at least 12 hours. I mean, he laid on, he has a bunk bed, and he got under the bottom, he laid down on the floor underneath the bed, and he wouldn't speak to anybody for hours. And he just felt so bad, like he let the team down. I couldn't do anything. I pulled out all my tricks. I couldn't do anything. He just had to feel bad, and he did get over it, of course, but it took him a long time. Why empathy? I'm going to skip that. You'll get the handout. But the basic idea is, if there's a potential for a power struggle, you're older, you're more mature, you cross the divide first. You try to build the bridge first. Don't wait for them to do it. They're not as developed as you. They're not as able to do this as you. Frame the dilemma. Part of the idea here is don't commit. As soon as you commit, you're in a power struggle. The idea here is juggling, keeping the balls in the air, so to speak. And we're going to talk about this step on the one hand, one thing, and on the other hand, the other thing. And try your best not to make either option sound better. You'll understand what I mean, I hope, in a few moments. On the one hand, use your empathy for step number 2. Okay, on the one hand, all those examples I just gave, right? All those. On the one hand, homework is so pleasant for you, the ice cream is so good for you right now. On the other hand, and this is important to do without sarcasm, I do like love and logic a lot. I use it a lot, and there's some similarities here. The only thing I don't love about love and logic is sometimes I feel like it verges on sarcastic. This approach isn't. But it's harder to do in that way, because it really requires empathy. The best way to present, on the other hand, is to cite a motivation of theirs, something that they care about, something they're driven toward. I'll share examples in a minute. It's also okay to cite a value of the family. This is what's important to us in our family, as being on the other hand. And then it's also okay to cite a competing obligation. This is me with my daughter this morning. On the one hand, I know you really want your mom. On the other hand, she already took the other kids to school. She's not available. And on the other hand, I have this meeting I have to get to. If I don't get to Grayland by 9 o'clock, everybody's going to be really mad at me. I will let my friends down, and etc. Here's some examples. On the one hand, I realize this homework is really unpleasant for you. It's really not fun. On the other hand, you really seem to care what your teacher thinks about you. That's one example. That might not work, but it's possible. On the other hand, so here's some other possibilities. You seem really happy when you work hard for a good grade. On the other hand, we value hard work to gain rewards in this family. And by the way, you see there's a little hook in there, also behavior management programs, which are important. You can do all this nice talk all you want. I'm not a believer that solves everything. I do believe you have to have a hammer and a, what's the other thing? Carrot. In our family, on the one hand, I realize this homework is really unpleasant for you. On the other hand, in our family, we don't allow TV or games until homework is done. You notice I'm saying it with empathy. I'm trying to hold both sides for the kids simultaneously. This is hard to do, but practice, practice, practice. Here's some ones for ice cream. That ice cream looks, on the one hand, that ice cream looks so good right now. On the other hand, you got really out of control last time you ate ice cream in the afternoon. We all had a big fight. On the one hand, that ice cream looks so good. On the other hand, you told us you wanted to cut down on sweets. There are some kids who would sometimes recognize that they don't want to gain, they want to lose weight, or they heard it when the pediatrician said you need to cut down on your sweets. And it's possible you can use this. On the other hand, in our family, we really care about eating healthy foods. On the other hand, in our family, we don't allow sweets until dinner is finished. That's also kind of bringing in the behavior management piece. And then here's one I just wanted to highlight, just as almost a silly example, but if, on the other hand, if you eat an ice cream, it would be hard for me to follow my diet I'm working on. Now, I'm saying that for an important reason, because one of the worst things I see in my office is when parents have their own need, and they try to communicate to the kid that it's really in the kid's best interest. We probably all do that, a little bit at least. But if you do that a lot, it's really not good for the kid. And so I think it's much better to at least acknowledge it's your need, even if it's frankly, honestly, if it's a petty need. I'm not saying losing weight is a petty need. I'm just saying, even if it is a petty need, it's better to say this is what is so important to me and what my need is, than to try to make it sound like you're really doing it for them. Don't forget empathy for both sides of the dilemma. Who was here for Wendy Mogul last year at Grayland? Most people like that talk. I've read the books. I think they're outstanding. But the thing I remember most from her talk, she goes, the teenagers complaining about something. She goes, "Wow, that's a tough one." That stance alone, again, consistent with what Laura's saying. This is your challenge. This is your dilemma. This is frustrating for you. I may not have the best answer for you. That is a tough one. That's empathy. And that's basically that speaks to this whole approach. I can appreciate, on the one hand, how hard the situation is for you. On the other hand, we have some competing interests here, like your health, your well-being, your grades, our family functioning, my well-being, so I can be a good parent, and all those things fall in this boat. Step number 4, invite problem solving. Notice the key word, invite. Genuinely, not sarcastically. I see this get done sarcastically. Well, what do you think we should do? No, this is we. Let's think. Do you have any ideas? What are some ideas? Once you've queued up the dilemma, what do you think? Any ideas? 4B, bite your tongue. Because you're going to want to go, well, there's this idea, and this idea, and this idea, and this idea. And just like Laura said, the more you do that, the more you are robbing them of a chance of discovering what's possible for themselves. And at other times we're teaching them breathing and mindfulness. I do all those things. I do those with my clients, I do those with my kids too. This helps set up things like that. Take a bunch of deep breaths, let it sit, allow the dilemma to be theirs. Remember, very few situations have great urgency. Almost none. And that's another trap we get into. Our kids go, but if I don't do this right now, all the kids are going to hate me, or my teacher's going to tell me. No, that's really not what's going on. And if you can stay calm, as Laura said. If you absolutely must, you can lead them through a problem-solving process. Tentatively, here are some potential options. Try not to take sides. They do know what you really want them to do. So the more you can present it as really these are options. This is really your challenge. Let's think of, and then you can. All right, so if you choose, and you can think of a broad array of options. If you choose A, what might happen? What might your teacher say? What might your friends say? What might I say? What might mom say? Know your parental bottom line. So if you really can't go with one of the options, you can acknowledge that. I really can't go with that one because our doctor tells me it's really unhealthy to have too much ice cream. And allow for experimentation so they feel some control. Go ahead and let's see what happens. I did it, 21 minutes. So that's this approach in a very brief nutshell. Obviously, we can talk about it more together in a little bit. And there's a book and other resources, and always happy to talk about this stuff. I really love this approach. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Holly McAdams, and I'm the Director of School Counseling at Colorado Valley School. We're in Colorado Springs. We're a little bit further away, so I just thought I'd kind of introduce where I'm from. We're a boarding and day school. And I'm going to speak to you this morning about mindfulness. Speak up. So mindfulness. This picture actually, I had forgotten I was going to just jump into mindfulness, but when we were talking, Laura said, "Oh, that's a beautiful picture," and I said, "Well, that's actually from Fountain Valley School." About 2 years ago, how this all kind of started and how I got into looking at mindfulness is I kept hearing from students in my office, "I'm so stressed out, and there's nowhere to go on campus to be alone." And I thought, my goodness, we live on 1,200 acres, and there's nowhere to go to be alone. This labyrinth is the backdrop. Behind it is a pond, and that's a view of Pikes Peak. And so what a perfect place to be able to create an area for our students and our faculty to go to be alone. And it's been great to see it over the past couple of years and to see our students and our faculty actually go and to use this. So I just want to introduce that. We built that at our school and I'm quite proud of it, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So what is mindfulness? It's a term that or I keep hearing often, but what is it really? And mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. Well, that's quite a mouthful. And we're going to get more into the specifics of that. But what I'd like for each one of you to do right now is to place both of your feet on the floor, if they aren't already. And put your hands together, and if you're comfortable, close your eyes. Press your hands together as hard as you can, and just take a moment to take a deep breath in, and don't forget to exhale, and just feel where the stress is in your body. And as you do this, maybe take another breath in and out. And then slowly pull your hands apart and open your eyes. I really did that more for me than for you. So that's a practice of mindfulness. It's not complicated, it's pretty easy, but sometimes it's hard to remember to do that. The three of us were talking about how generally we don't do public speaking, and I was talking to my son about that. And my son looked at me and said, "Well, Mom, all you have to do before you get up there is take a couple of deep breaths." All right. So mindfulness is about making friends with your mind. Stress. So we thought there was stress in your life. I do not want to be in that little fish's position right now. But our world today is full of stress. We have a high-stress world. We're pressed for time. We just talked about that. We're technology-driven. We're overly scheduled. And that places most of us in a constant fight or flight position. And so the result of that, of being in that constant state of stress, is high stress and anxiety, limited attention and concentration, and which results sometimes in problems with our physical health. There's a lot of brain research out right now, and so when we look at our brains or our children's brains, and I'm going to kind of go back and forth between ourselves and our children because this applies to all of us, obviously. So the prefrontal cortex is the CEO of the brain. That's the guy in charge, right? So it regulates decision-making, judgment, planning, moral reasoning, sense of self. And when we experience stressful situations, it disengages the frontal lobes. And so over time, what it does, it can lead to impulsive behavior, being short-sighted, increased anxiety and depression, alcohol and drug abuse, learning disorders, as well as increased stress-related diseases. And then when we look at the subcortical fight or flight areas, when that becomes engaged, is the thalamus and the hippocampus, the brainstem. and the hypothalamus, it mobilizes the body for action, increasing our heart rate, our respiratory rate, and our muscle tone. And the nature of this system is to bypass the frontal executive functioning area, and it triggers us into the fight or flight mode. And so in our brain on stress, we have a lower serotonin, which makes us to be less flexible. We have inflexibility, low emotional control. We are focused, tend to be focused on negative. We have difficulty shifting focus and ruminating thoughts. There's an amino acid called GABA, and what that ends up doing is that you can't slow down, and we have excess firings in the brain, become anxious, panicky, and agitated. And then we have high norepinephrine, which leads to hypervigilance and that feeling of being wired and jittery. Do you guys know what I'm talking about here? Okay. So the myth is that stress is something that's done to us. We are victims of stress. But the reality is that each one of us has the ability to respond differently. So we have the power to modify our response. Contemporary research shows that we can't fully recover from any of these conditions by focusing on the symptoms. We have to change the way that we live. So when your brain on mindfulness, when you begin to practice mindfulness, when you're happy, joyous, and free, the emotional areas relax and the left prefrontal cortex becomes more active. And the research is showing that when people experience mindfulness practices, there's a shift from the right to left prefrontal cortex activation. So so breathing is kind of one of the first steps in mindfulness. It's the foundation for anxiety and stress. And so when you start to feel your body kicking into that stress mode, if you breathe, you will take care of some of that stress and anxiety. It takes about 20 seconds to turn the stress volume down. There's a 10 times increase in oxygen. It lowers your blood pressure, your respiration, increases the alpha waves, and increases the serotonin. There's a lot of research being done right now around mindfulness. Although mindfulness has been around for a very long time, this is not anything new, but the research that's being done is new. And it's, it takes a little while to get research together, particularly on adolescents and children. But what mindfulness is doing is helping ourselves and helping our children to recognize the nature of emotions so that we can act on them more carefully. So being in that present moment, we're able to realize what our emotions are, and then we can respond to them instead of react. It helps us to apprehend the nature of our thoughts so that we can let go of the ones that are harmful to ourselves and to others. It's pretty common that we tend to stick with that negative thinking, and so if we're able to be aware that we're having the negative thought, then we can try to let go of that. And it also helps us to improve awareness of our physical sensations of our bodies so that we can foster health and well-being. So again, mindfulness helps us to cultivate the present moment attention, supports emotional regulation, fosters that positive self-development, stress reduction, and supporting academic success. There's better focus and concentration, increased memory. There's a lot of benefits right now that are being exhibited or displayed by children that are utilizing mindfulness. It's being used right now to treat depression, anxiety, addictions, eating disorders. It's being used in a lot of clinical settings. There's also a huge influx in the schools. Mindfulness in education, and that's one of the resources that's available, and you can see it on the handout. So without mindfulness, there's a stimulus and then there's a reaction. And with mindfulness, there's the stimulus, a person being mindful and thinking about what's happening, and then there's the response. The program that I've used with our students at Fountain Valley is called Learning to Breathe, And so essentially what we're doing, or what I'm doing with the students, is going through these 7 areas, and we're talking about the body. What is stress? How does stress impact your body? How does it impact your thinking, your thoughts, your emotions? How does it help us to pay attention and having that tenderness, that compassion and empathy that they were talking about? How do you develop a healthy mind and then empowering the students or empowering your children to do it themselves? When we look at mindfulness in parenting, we can talk about teaching our children. How are we going to teach our children to regulate their emotions? How are we going to teach them to be mindful? The best way to do that is to be a power of example yourselves. And so if you are interested in doing a mindfulness program, beginning it yourself and paying attention to your thoughts in that present moment, there's a lot of resources out there. There's online classes that you can take. There's a lot of resources right here in Denver of programs that you can do. It's a lot easier to do or practice mindfulness with a group and then being able to check in and see how other people are doing. When I started doing this, I started doing it as a practice for myself that I thought, well, maybe it's something that I can eventually do with our students. And that's what it's become. And somehow my son has tagged along, which is great. That was not my intention. My intention was not to, hey, I'm going to start, becoming a mindful parent so that way I can interact, better or differently with my son. It's just happened. It's developed. Mindful parenting, what is that? It's moment-to-moment, open-hearted, and non-judgmental attention. It's taking that breath before you respond to your child in whatever chaos is going on. When you break down, there's 5 dimensions of it. So Daniel was talking about listening with our full attention and really being there, listening to them and not thinking about your grocery list or where it is that you need to go next. Non-judgmental acceptance of yourself and the child, and really accepting who they are and what space they're in. Emotional awareness of yourself and your child. Self-regulation in the parenting relationship, and compassion for what's happening in that moment, which is hard to do. This is simple, but sometimes it's not always easy. So one way that you can remember doing this, a simple step in doing this with your kids, is peace. So P is for pause, E is for exhale, and don't forget to inhale. A is for acknowledge, accept, and allow. C is for choose. To choose how are you going to respond to this situation. And E is for engage and engaging. And what you'll start to see is that if you begin to develop a mindfulness program, is that you will be engaging with your child in this. You're in it together. Your child will begin to give you cues, like mine did, about don't forget to just breathe. But you'll also be able to give your child cues. And so you're in it together as parent and child, or as a family, if you're choosing to do some mindfulness practice with your entire family. Mindfulness comes in different ways of being able to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness can be a more formal meditative period. You can also practice mindfulness all throughout your day. I know how many of you drove here and actually remember the route that you took to get here. You can be mindful while you're brushing your teeth, while you're washing the dishes. So really it's just a practice of being in the present moment and being, I always tell the kids, right, where are your feet right now? And they put up one hand and then they say, right here. I'm like, okay, well this is where we need to be. This is where we need to be right here in this present moment. So mindfulness is an experiential discipline. It's something that we do. And to offer it with integrity and authenticity, the teaching really comes out of our own practice and being the person that we're asking our kids to be. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of daily practice and a lot of discipline. And that's why I'm saying if you are able to practice with a group of people and do some meditation with a group, and then have some check-in throughout the week to say, well, how did you do? How were you being mindful? And that's what I do with the students at Fountain Valley, is that I teach, this program is offered to all of our freshmen. And then once a week, I do a meditation for whoever chooses to come. And then we check in about how were you mindful this week? What did you do to practice? And throughout the week, when the students see each other going to classes or going back and forth to their dorms, they have that reminder of, oh yeah, when I see Jane, I'm supposed to be doing something. I'm supposed to be practicing mindfulness. So it creates a community that we can all check in with each other around. So it's much easier when you have those connections to be able to do it. And I'm done. So I think we're gonna open it up for questions or comments, and if you can just direct who your question is to, that will probably help us as well.
And Craig asked me to repeat the questions for the video, so forgive me for repeating the questions.
I guess I'll ask Dan. Thank you all for being here. I think this was really helpful. And I think that if we could follow everything you said, there wouldn't be a need for your profession.
Don't do it that well.
Don't do it
So
that
we
way.
can
Seriously, my question is, when do you worry about the dysregulation? When is it a cause to really call you and say, I'm worried about what he's saying, what he's threatening, how he handles his dysregulation?
So the question is, when do you worry? When is it enough that it's important to call somebody and get some support for trying to handle it better? Yes?
For not only a parent to handle it,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
for what the child's feeling and just how despondent and destructive they get.
Yeah. I can try first, see what you all think. I mean, there's a really obvious ones if they're doing something to regulate their emotions that is really destructive. Drug use, alcohol use, cutting, feeling suicidal without an ability to get themselves out of that feeling. Those are some of the really scary things that it's important to get help for. And then I think even this is a response that even combines what we're each talking about. It is normal and healthy, and when I teach mindfulness to kids and families, feeling sad is a normal feeling. Most of our kids, most of us, feel an ounce of sadness every time we say goodbye in the morning to our kids or to our spouses or whomever, or you have family out of town. There's all kinds of ways that these feelings get evoked for us regularly. Anger is the same way. There are injustices, there are things that we really want that we can't quite achieve. So I think experiencing these emotions regularly is not a cause for calling, but if they last without resolution for long periods of time, in a single episode, I gave you an example of my child being distraught for 12 hours, and I was not exaggerating. He had to sleep through the night before he would speak to us again. But I didn't feel, I kind of knew it was a one-shot deal for him. He doesn't usually get all upset about sports. But I would say if it persists and both over time, it happens regularly, several times a week, several times a day, and if each episode depends on the age somewhat, but if the episodes last longer than 20, 30 minutes on a regular basis, that's a time to be trying some new things. That's a thought.
I guess what I would,
No? The only thing I would add is that it's never too soon to start helping your children learn how to handle their emotions. So don't wait. I mean, don't wait till it gets to the point where it's more problematic start to try to do things on your own, read, get resources. I think I have like 3 pages of resources for you on my list of books and websites and articles and different things. So gather information, and if we keep doing things the same, things tend to stay the same, or they will stay the same. So if we keep responding in the same way, and our children keep responding in the ways that they are right now, that's how they're going to do it. And yes, there might be a threshold at which you become really concerned and you feel like you can't do it on your own. But if you haven't tried things on your own first, try some. Just try to tweak things just a little bit. My kind of motto is, and this comes straight out of my couples therapy research, et cetera. I said, if you keep doing things in the same way, the pattern keeps continuing. I do this, they do this, I do this, they do this. And the patterns keep continuing. But if you do something different anywhere in that cycle, you're going to shake things up and you're going to make things move in a slightly different direction. And so even small steps can really make a difference. So consider them. And then if you don't feel like you can do it on your own, or if you don't feel like you're having enough of an impact, then seek help. You really need it.
Yeah. I saw your hand as we were beginning. Now there's a bunch of people.
I just had a quick question, and I know you have a bunch of resources. Can you point to some of them that would address a child who has a lot of difficulty with feedback? We're doing, and I'm sorry that it's a personal thing, but my child really struggles if we're going through homework, for example, and I point out to her that she's using the word incorrectly. She said to me yesterday, I hate it when you're right, Mom. And I'm like, okay, it's really just you're using it as a noun and it's a verb. It's not about, there's a moral, assessment. But she really, really struggles with constructive criticism, and it's going to be a challenge for her because she's going to have to learn to deal with it. So are there certain books or articles or techniques? We talk about how do you want to hear it then from me? She doesn't have the answer. She doesn't know.
So the question is for the video, do any of us know of resources to help parents give feedback and constructive criticism to your kids without them, losing it? Right? You know that?
I don't know of a specific resource on that specific topic, but my general reaction to the question is that kids have a really hard time hearing that kind of things, especially from us as parents. And I've actually had teachers, really skilled teachers along the way say, don't do it. That they say, let me be the one to correct them, the teacher. Let the teacher be the one to challenge them, to correct them. You can ask, and it sounds like you already have done something like this, like, do you want feedback? Do you want me to tell you what I see or what I've noticed in your work? But what your child is probably hearing, or what our kids tend to hear is, I've screwed up, I've done it wrong, I've made a mistake. And so that's what they're hearing from us, and it's really hard for them to hear it from us. So kind of utilizing the techniques that we've talked about is that empathy piece, put yourself in their shoes, and your mind, it sounds like, is around, well, my kid needs to learn how to take feedback, like they need to learn how to do this, and it's my responsibility to teach them to be able to take feedback, perhaps. But they're going to learn that from a lot of different folks and a lot of different angles, and it's really hard to hear it from a parent. And I think that what your child, that sounds like, is hearing, and what my children tend to hear when I comment on things like that is, I've messed up, I've disappointed you, and that feels really tough for them to hear from us. So that's my feeling.
I support what you're saying. That would be what I was going to say.
I'd say something similar. I don't know of a resource either. The approach that I talked about is pretty good for that. You're probably not going to get very far in the moment. Sorry to be out of the moment from the mindful. But when you're calm, when you're not working on homework, when it's just a more relaxed time, a more relaxed day, to present the dilemma to her. We're in a tough spot together. On the one hand, you like to be right, and you like to do your homework well, and you don't like to hear that you've done things wrong. On the other hand, your teacher tells me it's my responsibility. Your teacher tells me it's my responsibility to check your homework. Sometimes I notice you didn't do something right, and I want to give you a chance to correct it. What are some let's think of some ideas.
And so I have 4 children, and my oldest 2, I feel like I'm constantly breaking up fights between them. And, I try to do things like ahead of time to diffuse situations, like leave the restaurant, okay, the sit next to them. But it seems like my 9-year-old, wasn't here at 60, my 6-year-old, getting frustrated, starting she'll do one thing, and it just, goes completely off the deep end. And I'm just struggling with how to deal with that. I feel like I just scream. It's really just stressful.
I hear you, me too. The question is intense sibling conflict, where they're really, really hard on each other. Do we have thoughts on that? Anybody want to start?
Well, I think what you're talking about is trying to diffuse a situation before it starts. And I think sometimes that's the best place to start, and we can do the best that we can in those situations. Again, specific resources, I don't have any that are, popping into mind right now, but trying to diffuse the situation. And also doing activities, I think, that are going to be relationship building for the 2 of them, if you can. How is it that they can develop that compassion and empathy towards each other? One's 9, one's 6. So understanding where the other one, the age difference, developmentally, where are they and what are they doing, and trying to be creative about how are you going to build that relationship between the 2 of them, but also giving them their independence to be apart from one another as well.
And I do have a couple of resources specifically on that topic that I like. If you look at my giant handout, there's one's called Kids, Parents, and Power Struggles, and another's called Parenting Without Power Struggles, and the other one's called Siblings Without Rivalry. And it's a good book. It really is. It gives you ideas. It gives you a framework for building empathy. And so I would recommend kind of taking a look at those. And I mean, it's a book that I have in my home. I don't even bring it to the office. I'm like, yeah, I have this book, but I look at it from time to time. And I do have kids who struggle with each other, and it is really challenging. And some of the ideas that you heard here, I think, could be applied to those situations. And I do. Yeah, I recommend kind of thinking about how you could use some of the ideas that we've talked about here today to apply to that situation, and then maybe look at those resources as well. Because I think it just gives us, the more tools we have in our backpack, the more effectively we can parent as well.
From this approach that I talked about today, one way to apply that's hard for us to do, because we love our kids, each of them so much, but is go up to your 9-year-old and acknowledge with your 9-year-old how annoying the 6-year-old really is. I'm serious. I mean, it's a younger sibling's job to annoy their older sibling as much as possible. And because they don't have as much power, and they're trying to feel that sense of power, and they can't do it usually by intellect or better athletic skills or better physical skills. And so it's a fairly common, it's not in every, but it's common. And we drive ourselves crazy trying to stop it. I don't think empathy is the end, but I do think it's a start. Often we go in there without empathy. Yeah, your brother really is annoying. We tend to empathize with the younger sibling. Is that true of most of us, right? Because the older one's kind of mean to the younger one. We could all tell you stories about that, I'm sure. My favorite is, before we had our second child, someone said to me, just imagine your wife came home and says to you, I love you, honey. I love you as much as I always have, but I want you to meet this other guy that I love every bit as much as you, and he's moving in, and I expect you to be nice to him. Doesn't make sense. We do want our kids to be nicer and work conflicts out, all these things, but if we don't have empathy for why it's so hard, to me it's harder to make progress.
I'm going to go to the people whose hands I saw first. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
So you talked about the importance of routine and stability and consistency. How do we help our kids cope with change? And we're nanny, we're moving, changing the summer routine to something that disrupts what their expectations.
question is we talked about stability and predictability, but what about helping kids cope with changes, small changes and big changes?
Prepare them. And just talk about it. I think that's probably the best suggestion that I can give you is I have a son who, for whatever reason, is very into his routine, and it drives me nuts. But I have to, and I'm always reminded that when I try to transition or switch that routine too quickly, like we talked about earlier, is that if I don't give him advanced notice that we're going to be doing something different after school, then all heck breaks loose. So talking to them about it, if you can, you're talking about if you could go visit the area to familiarize them with the surroundings, or if you're going to a new school, take them on visits to be able to go to wherever the location is, and just trying to talk about it as much as you can, as well as having that attachment to whatever it is that they're leading. So sometimes we talk about transitional objects. So young kids who are going off to school, maybe they bring a picture book of their families with them to school, so that way they can make that transition easier. Or if you're moving from one place to another, having something that they're bringing from the old house to the new house, and creating a new ritual or a new routine around whatever it is that's new.
There's a newish form of therapy that's come out in the last 8 or 10 years. It's called acceptance and commitment therapy. Do you guys use this at all? I'm familiar with it. It's not, but it's interesting to look up. I think the primary author's name is Stephen Hayes. Is that correct? But yeah, my understanding, one of the main ideas of it is it's very consistent with mindfulness, and it integrates with mindfulness. Is that we need to be able to work on developing tolerance for these difficult emotions. The fight or flight, we all tend to try to get away from the difficult emotions. So I think really consistent with mindfulness and with what Kelly's talking about, we can prepare our kids for discomfort and imagine and practice discomfort, new people, new things. What might that be like? Not so that we can make the feeling go away. Some kids naturally are more resistant to change than others. Some kids are more anxious temperamentally than others. All those kinds of things. So we can't if we try to take away the anxiety and the stress, we really can fight a losing battle sometimes. And so imagining and practicing the experience of discomfort, I think, can be done in a mindfulness kind of way.
Follows on to that discomfort. I have 2 children, both of which get true physical manifestations of frustration and anxiety. One gets debilitating headaches and the other has chronic stomach. And I can predict when it's going to come, like tackling difficult homework or just too much on their plate. And I can try to arrange for that not to happen, but as you were just saying, sometimes they have to go through some frustration. And I struggle with both, trying to figure out how to sort of protect against it a little and how much I should protect against it. And also, once we're in the moment of, there's clearly an emotion driving it, but the problem is that they're probably involved in your head. You try to address the physical and put aside the emotional later. I just struggle with how as a parent to juggle that. There's clearly a physical thing going on, but there's also an emotional thing going on, and trying to be attentive to the physical, and yet you know that the real, comes up.
So I'm trying to think how to rephrase the question for the video. No, it's okay. So some children experience stress in physical ways. I'm losing the first part of the question. You say it again. How much do you try to rearrange things so they experience less stress, compared with how much do you try to help them build their stress tolerance? And then the second part of the question is, when they're on the floor in a fetal position or whatever, how much do we attend to the physical component? How much do we attend to the emotional?
Or when, in what order?
In what order?
Well, I think that in the short term, I think my response would be that dealing with the physical manifestation and empathizing with them and giving them compassion because I don't think you're going to get anywhere on an emotional level if you can't get through to on the physical. So in that moment when they're experiencing the physical discomfort, to address that. But I think the bigger, longer term answer is helping your children to build that emotional regulation. And so one of the examples that I like to use with kids is thinking about a pot of boiling water. And when we're thinking about our stress and the pot of boiling water, it starts to bubble and it simmers and it has those little bubbles on the bottom. And then the bubbles start to get bigger and come up, and then there's steam and a full-on boil. So when we're talking to our children about stress, we feel it physically before we get to that real boil. So if we can help our kids to identify when they're at that simmering point, or when they're at, we're talking about kids going from 0 to 60, when they're at 10, what does that feel like in your body? And so, when Laura was talking about helping them talk through their emotions, or it looks like you're getting frustrated, or it looks like you're feeling a little bit anxious, and then helping them to identify where they are on that, whether you use the analogy of the boiling water or, a speedometer going up, and helping them to then put in, okay, so how do you take care of yourself now? How do you take care of yourself now at each interval? And hopefully they don't reach the highest interval.
I'll add just a tiny bit to that, which is I talk to kids about anger, and you can apply it to stress as well, about kind of like the idea of like a meter where it's 0 to 10, and then you can identify that when you're in your yellow zone, when you're in your orange zone, and when you're in your red zone, like the tiny bubbles of water at the bottom of the pot. When you're in your yellow zone, it's much easier to make an impact on a situation than when you're in your orange zone and your red zone. And for some kids, they have this tiny yellow zone and the rest is red. So you have to identify how you're put together, how your child is put together. But then the other piece is that depending on where, and I agree that once they're in the red zone, it's really hard to make an impact. It's like trying to tell an alcoholic when they're drunk. That's the time you try to have a conversation with them about you drink too much. It doesn't work. You can't talk to somebody who's totally intoxicated about their drinking. You have to wait till they're not drinking, they're sober, they're calm, they're okay, and then say, I'm really worried about your drinking. It's really concerning me. So the other piece of it is that if they're in a zone where they can do something about it, then the goal would be really, that's another piece I didn't put in my wish I had, which is to set attainable goals. And an example would be that let's say you identify that your stress level is at an 8. Then your job is only to take it to a 7. That's all you have to do. You don't have to try to, you or your child does not have to take it from an 8 to a 0. That's an unrealistic goal. It's not going to happen. But if you can figure out ways to teach your kids, especially when they have these really big reactions and that end up with that headache, so they're starting to feel a tiny bit of a headache. So what can you do to knock it down one notch, just one notch? Maybe it's drink a big glass of water, maybe it's whatever works, whatever tends to work for them. What can you do to just knock it down one notch? That's all you have to do. And that often feels much more attainable.
I'll try to first answer the question. About how much you try to rearrange things. I'm sorry, it's cold. I think I have a bias toward not protecting them so much, really working on trying to face challenges. And I think as parents we can just work so hard to try to reduce or eliminate stress. I do think we should try to reduce and eliminate stress by making life more predictable and consistent and things like that. But in terms of social challenges and academic challenges, a lot of our kids are at pretty challenging schools. There are real challenges, but most of our kids are equipped, have the basic equipment to be able to cope with those challenges. Doesn't mean they're going to be the straight A student or the best athlete or whatever it may be. But I tend to lean more toward, let's keep thinking about how we can deal with this. I don't know.
It's the idea of the blessings in me.
Yeah.
It's okay to be hurt sometimes, it's okay to feel yucky sometimes, it's part of, and again, that's that building frustration tolerance, building that tolerance for discomfort. Kids who aren't able to tolerate that frustration tend to seek other, escape a lot, and so that's a risk.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, you.
Different approaches for families that have multiple kids. Can you have different approaches for different kids in a household? Or should you try and have one protocol that fits? An example is I have 2 children, the timeout works great. There's wrong, when there's timeout, the behavior stops, they get all that done. Another child, put her in timeout, you can put her in timeout 100 times, the behavior is never going to stop, and she's going to yell at me all kinds of times. So, but the other 2 kids, I feel like timeout's great. So do I keep timeout for 2 and then try maybe the 6th little bit? What you were saying, Dr. Holman, for the 3rd, or do I try that 3rd program for all 3 kids?
Great question. So the question is, if you have multiple children in your family, do you use the same approach for all 3 to be consistent? We're talking about consistency and predictability, or is it okay to use different approaches with different kids? Is that paraphrase it well? Anybody want to? I think it's okay to use different programs for different kids. They need. I know my 3 kids. One needs a significantly different approach than the others, and kids are so different, and their temperature regulation for these emotions are so different from one another. What sets them to boiling can be so different from one another, and one of the things I didn't say about this approach that I was talking about is that another one of the premises is that when they do have meltdowns, it's just awful. It just makes everybody feel terrible. And so this approach actually talks about some leniency in the early going, just to diminish the meltdowns. And so you might find yourself being more lenient toward one kid at a certain time, or approaching them, one kid in a more gentle way, one kid in a more firm way, because they respond to it differently. They need to come at it from a different angle. So I think it's great to use different approaches with different kids.
And that's okay, they're not going to look, I'm being an unfair parent, or I'm doing one or the other?
I guess that's a whole other question. My thought is, no, they might, right?
That's okay.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah. We, this again, go back to all this whole thing about empathy, and we love each of you so much, and we see each of you differently, and each of you, we feel it's important to respond to you in different ways, and we really want to just, work things out with you better, so that we don't have these episodes where we all feel so terrible. Anybody else want to?
I was just going to add, it's okay to have different approaches, and then with the consistency piece, be consistent in your different approaches, so to speak. And I think you'll find some nice ideas in that Siblings Without Rivalry too, because it kind of talks about how it's not about giving everybody exactly the same thing or every child exactly the same thing. It's about meeting each child's needs, and they're not always the same.
So we had a word,
So to continue the analogies, we talk about the red flag, whether it's boiling water, the red flag going up. And I have my older son, he's very expressive and able to promote my red flag is, up top. And in fact, it exploded off the flagpole recently. And where he gets very upset is in this notion of, he's got this moral compass of rightness and wrongness, and when he feels that where he's been wronged or not heard in his, it was wrong. I was treated unfairly, and it makes him. And so.
It's a lot of head shaking.
And I, having read Raising Resilient Children, I think. Totally understand the sense of empathy and understanding that I've tried many times when I've said life isn't fair. And
I'm sure that works really well.
And so he's like, thanks. That's very helpful. So can you help me understand how, in terms of using empathy,
I can explain to him that life isn't fair. And it's, even when you feel wrong, I know you feel wronged, but life isn't fair. And then the light switch goes off and the flag goes up higher and it's a mess.
So the question is, what do you do about a child that has a very strong sense of justice and fairness? And that is one of the things that really sends them into fury. And how do you respond to them? One attempt is to say, is to try to teach them a life lesson. That life isn't fair, life doesn't always work out the way you want. So how do you deal with that, or how do you try to convey that? I think, you heard me tease you. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't make you feel bad. That doesn't work very well, right? Life isn't fair. That's not helpful to me, and that makes me feel pessimistic about the world, and I just have to be stuck feeling this way and all that stuff. It's hard. First answer is it's hard. We all know those kinds of kids. We all probably have kids that at least have some version of that. For me, again, I'm sticking with the Ross Greene kind of approach. I think it's not so much that life isn't fair. I think it's that, on the one hand, that feels really rotten to you, and that feels like that's not fair. And on the other hand, there's a whole other story that we don't know, we may not even know about. The teacher treated the kid unfairly, right? Teachers aren't perfect, coaches aren't perfect, the kid didn't play as much in the game, or whatever it may be. And we don't have to know the answer, but I do think we can slow it down and just say, on the one hand, you didn't get to play in the soccer game. You only got to play 10 minutes in the soccer game, and that feels really unfair. Empathize, get with it. Show it with your face and your body and your tone. On the other hand, I just don't know. I just don't know what was going on with the coach. I wonder if there's a way to find out. Most of these situations, there's another perspective on it.
I like Daniel's comment a lot just because that piece about unfairness feels very much like that's the only way that he can see, that he can see the situation. And so opening up to there might be a slightly different view, or there might be a different way of thinking about it can, just potentially, dissipate the intensity or
And just, is it okay if notice I don't say what I think the coach is thinking. That's what we all tend to do. Like, well, maybe it's this, and maybe it's that, it's that. And you can do that, but in my experience, it's not as effective as if you can be really mindful, which we're not. None of us can be all the time, especially in our families with our kids. But when we can, we just say, I don't know, but I wonder if there's a way for us to find out. Again, that gives them a chance. We don't want to render them powerless. If we have all the answers, they're powerless. And frankly, the truth is, we usually don't know with these situations when they're talking about fairness and they come home and they say, the kid was so mean to them. We don't know if our kid was equally mean, right? As an example. Or did the coach have a good reason? We get just so caught up in all that stuff. But really, I think I like what Laura's saying, kind of
just wondering is sometimes enough. That you don't even have to say it. Let's find out all the other options, but just I wonder what they are, and just sometimes opening that up can really help.
I think in opening up those options, also talking about, is there anything that you can do to take action? Do you have any action steps that you can do to make this situation any better or different? And if they can't, because sometimes they can't, then what do you do with all the feelings that you're having? Whether it's frustration or anger or whatever. So now what do you do with that? How do you handle the feeling that you are now left with? So sometimes that can help them to figure out, is there any action I can take? And if not, now what do I do with all this junk that I'm feeling?
I agree. We don't want to make it our problem. The more we do that, the more we get stuck with them, and it leaves them off the hook. Even if they have been done something terribly unfair, it's the resolution is going to come from inside them. It is really not going to come from us. I really believe that strongly. All right? Yeah.
So mine's actually a follow-up on the different approaches for different siblings question, because that would have been the first part of my question for sure. I've got 2 older daughters, 2nd grade and kindergarten, and I have to use completely different approaches with them. They have definite birth order, first child and second child. And I guess projecting into the future, I worry, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on this, I worry that the second child, for whom I have to use sort of harsher techniques, won't feel like I'm the bad kid, or, well, my sister's just perfect. She does everything perfect, and so what does that mean about me? I don't see that happening yet, but I've thought about it for the future and thinking, I don't want this to be the dynamic, so I guess that's my question.
Wow, I think that's such a great question and a really hard one. So the question is, since you have to take different approaches with different kids, if you sometimes have to take the harsher, firmer approach with one kid, could that have a really negative effect on them? And could they be complaining to their therapist in 10 years that you were so mean to them and so nice to the other sibling? I need to think about that one a little bit. So somebody else go with that one first.
Yeah, I think it's almost goes back to what we were saying before, is that I think it's important for our children to know that we interact with them differently, and that's okay. They're going to see that in real life. They're going to see it in the classroom with other students, that the teacher may interact with this child in this way and this child in that way, and then it goes back to the relationship building, so that you have the positive interactions with both of your children, and that you do things with them together, but you also do things with them individually. So that maybe you have to do a little bit more double time with the kid that you're harsher with or stricter with, but that you still have that positive bond and that connection with your child. And it's life. I mean, we each deal with. When we take that into the workplace, we will deal with our coworkers differently depending on what their personalities are. So I think it's a skill to build early on.
I did have one thought is to connect it to something that's great about them. Connect it to some strength of theirs. Instead of, I had to do this because you're so difficult. You're strong-willed, you have, and I don't mean this as BSing them. I mean, really, most of our blessings are also our curses and vice versa. So I think it might take some work to think about it, but I would hope you could find some way to connect it to. This is a way, you're a really passionate child, or you have such strong feelings that to get the best from you, this was the approach that we felt like was best, or something like that. All right.
The only thing I would add is just that it's about balance. I like what Kelly said too, just in terms of making sure that there are really positive connections also with that child, even amidst the whatever techniques you decide to use that tend to work better for one versus the other. Yes, and I love the idea of reframing issues that you struggle with, like bossiness versus strong leadership, things like that, to avoid using terms, and I like the idea of passion versus strong-willed, so it is nice it's good for us to do that in our own minds, and then it's really nice for us to switch that language when we're talking to our kids, because it goes much farther. The person who asked earlier about giving feedback, it's really hard to hear that you're bossy. It's much easier to hear that you're a strong leader, and that sometimes you. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for time-constrained situations to avoid emotional outbursts? So no matter what I say could result in a complete blow-up, yet. If I don't say anything, there's just no way we're getting out that door on time.
So the question is dealing with time-constrained situations, especially getting out the door in the morning. I'm sure there's a lot of heads nodding about that one too.
I mean, again, I hate to be redundant, but it's about planning ahead of time. And for example, I'll give you some examples of what I do in my home is that we have the little lists on the fridge of what their morning jobs are. And so it's just planning ahead, knowing what's coming and making it really clear what the expectations are. My kids, at least one of them, struggles with change and disruptions in routine and that sort of thing. So the more clear I can be about what is expected and what's going to happen, the more that I can prepare myself and anticipate situations and be ready myself. And of course, it's not always possible, and then we end up with these situations that are much more challenging. But the more you can anticipate and plan and prepare, the better the situations tend to be.
And what if you're already in the situation?
Yes. Yeah, again.
Yeah, well, really bad.
I mean, once we're in it, I acknowledge it. I mean, that's one piece, which is just to say, I'm sorry that we're so rushed today, and I know it's tough. It's tough for me, and it's tough for all of us. And so that empathy piece, that acknowledging piece, that owning it, what's my responsibility and what's not. And you know, when the situations, when the morning doesn't go well, to acknowledge our responsibility in that. You know, I could have planned better, and I'm sorry that our morning was hard, and I'm sorry I lost my temper a little, or repairing we're going to make mistakes as parents. We're going to lose our cool sometimes. It's going to happen. But repairing those and modeling for them that we own our stuff. There's some great literature in the, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Girls Inc. material. I have 2 girls, so I'm really interested in the girl stuff, but obviously love the boys too. There's a line in there that's just really resonated with me, which is, I realize that and next time I will. So I realized that I didn't plan so well this morning and that we were really rushed today. Next time maybe we can try to make these really crazy mornings go a little better. Something like that. So I own it and I model owning it, and they can then in turn sometimes do that as well.
Can I follow that one right up? I just totally agree with that. And our kids, most of them don't care whether they get out the door on time or not. There are some exceptions to that. One of my kids really just has to get to school on time and wants to be early. You know, that's I think unusual. And so I think again, consistent with this approach and consistent with what Laura's saying, if we own, it's really our need to get out of the house and plan and absolutely planning ahead. Our kids, as much as they get mad at us and as much as they love to trip us up in ways and all that kind of stuff, they really do want us to be happy and feel good. And so if we're really earnest, we're not laying a guilt trip, but we say, I just got to tell you, this is just so important to me. I have obligations in my work, and it's so important for me to get you to school on time. The school says they really want us parents to get, when things are common, to be able to say that and speak to it being your need. I think you have a better chance than if you try to make it all about the kid's need, which they might not care about.
I want to add one tiny little thing, which is just my lists on the fridge of what their morning jobs are. And then I can say to them, instead of saying, can you brush your hair, can you do this, can you do that? I'm like, why don't you check your list? Have you finished all your jobs? Because they're like, can I play on, what's it called, the educational game, coolmath.com or something like that, I don't know. That they love these different things to do for a few minutes in the morning. I'm like, did you check your list? Have you done all your jobs? And then I'm not like, did you do this? Did you do this? I'm just like, go check your list. You're responsible.
Yeah, I have a question back on frustration. In the beginning, you kind of went through the steps of when your kid is having an emotional response to something. At what point do you step in, not so much to have you about when you seek outside help, but if your kid, like a middle school age kid, is kind of having a fit over something that they're frustrated and they're, not a person, but just throwing, you ask them to clean up and throwing their shoes back into the bin. I mean, is that okay? That's their way of dealing with it, and you just walk away and let them go in their room and have a fit, but they'll calm themselves down, or are you supposed to say, I asked you to clean up, and now you're mad? Really, like if I ask my son to clean up and he's angry, so he'll do it, and he's throwing things, that's his response. I try to separate myself from, don't do it with that attitude, but is that okay? Because that's his response, but he's controlling. And where's the difference?
See, if I rephrase it, see if I'm catching it right. What's the balance between accepting and tolerating your child's emotions and their emotional expression compared with expecting them to behave properly, something like that, or not hurt people, not hurt things in the house?
Well, not hurting people is what it is. Somewhere inside me it's like, why aren't you doing that with a smile? I'm joking, but that's really so good. Life's not fair.
Yeah, that's like life's not fair. Good luck. Who wants to go first? And this has to be the last question because it is 11 o'clock.
Okay, so, I think there's, one of the things that we're always trying to teach our kids are boundaries. And what's appropriate in our homes and what's not appropriate in having those boundaries. But what we're also teaching them for, and I think you're talking about an adolescent's son or close to adolescence, we're also teaching them how to behave outside of our homes. So if we're allowing them to have an attitude while they're putting their things away, how does that transfer to school or how does that transfer to work? So I guess trying to help them to create some boundaries around, yes, you can have emotion, you can have anger and frustration, but it's how you exhibit it is kind of the important part of it. So if, using that example with your child, that if you're going to put all your stuff away and create a scene around this, how does that transfer to school? So are you throwing stuff in your locker? Are you shoving stuff in your desk? Are you pushing your peers down the hallway? Where does this apply to your like a home, but how else is this going to apply? So I feel like we need to help our kids to demonstrate their anger and their frustration in our home the same way that they would do it out in public. I think as they get older, they're able to see that transfer of behavior, that they need to behave appropriately. And if we don't help them to do that in our own homes, then how are they going to do that in public? So I think there's some acknowledging and acceptance of you may feel however it is that you want to feel, but how you exhibit it is what's important.
One thought I had was just prevention. Once your kid is having a fit, it's hard to ask them to do anything. It's kind of too late. And so, like Kelly's saying, understanding the triggers and having conversations about it when things are much calmer, and being very firm with your behavior, and then just saying, as Kelly said, that balance between it's understandable that you have a feeling, but it's also not acceptable in our family or out there in the world to be kicking, screaming, etc. All that kind of stuff.
I like thinking about using the model that Daniel brought up, the collaborative problem-solving approach. Just that on the one hand, and to talk about it, I totally agree with Daniel, talking about it at a time when things are not flared, that's the time. But just to say, I notice that this happens a lot. And on the one hand, I know you're frustrated and you don't want to clean and you don't want to do these jobs. They're boring. Who wants to do housework? Just really validate and empathize. And on the other hand, these are the responsibilities that we have in this family. This is what we all do. We all pitch in. And to just have a conversation about it, to say, but I'm also concerned about, is this the way you express yourself at school? And when somebody asks you to do something, and let's just talk about it. And what do you think? And what do you feel about it? And just be open about it with them.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you.
Okay. So then Bill, just like,
With the bracelet. Yeah.
how are you?
I'm fine. How are you? She's like, that's your job. Yeah, but enough house on the That's it.
That's a conference.
All right, have a good day. All right, bye.
Tell me your name again. Brian.
Oh, the green one?
Oh, really?
No, well, this is going to be remodeled. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I was like, I want to share. That's a bummer.
yeah. It was so pretty.
Sorry. Filming our conversation. Oh, yeah.